Hello and welcome to today's YouTube webinar. We'll be getting started momentarily. We're just waiting for the viewers to join. It appears that the viewers have joined, so thank you so much. We're going to be getting started in a moment. Just verifying the audio works. Okay, it appears that the audio is working. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for taking the time to join today's session. Today's session will be discussing the do's and don'ts of self-directed IRA LLC real estate investments. Again, this is another session of My Solo 401k Financials weekly YouTube webinar series. We would please ask you to like and subscribe. Please like this video. Please subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. We will be posting a discussion forum in our My Community website. So that's a great place to ask follow-up questions about today's video, as well as any other questions that you might have. We have forums. We have weekly webinars for our My Community members almost every day of the week. So it's free to join and all are welcome. If you have questions as we're going through this these slides, and you're watching here live, you can please post those questions in the YouTube chat and I will answer those questions as we go through the slides. If you're watching as a recording, you can post questions in that same My Community discussion, and we will answer the questions there. So just to set the stage, we're going to be focused today again on self-directed IRA LLC real estate investments. So the scenario is someone has an IRA that's invested in a single member LLC. Or it could be multi-member, but they have their IRA funds invested in an LLC. So if, for example, multi-member would be, and a common example would be a husband and wife. Let's say they each have IRA funds invested in that one LLC. And then the individuals or the individual, if it's just one IRA, serves as the manager of the LLC. So they're able to have checkbook control over the money and invest in alternative investments like real estate. So today's session, we're going to focus on someone that is investing their IRA LLC funds in real estate and go over some very important do's and don'ts. So now that we've laid the foundation as far as what we're focused on, let's go ahead and get going with the do's and don'ts. So the first do and don't that we want to review is you want to confirm that your IRA can invest in a single member LLC. So, for example, if you have an IRA at a traditional brokerage firm, such as Fidelity or Vanguard or Schwab, those firms don't allow their IRA customers to invest in alternative investments, including investing into a single member LLC. So on the don't side of the equation, you want to confirm that the current IRA custodian doesn't restrict that type of investment. So in other words, you need to transfer the current IRA to an IRA custodian that allows for alternative investments, specifically a single member LLC. So there is a universe of custodians out there that will allow you to invest in alternative investments, for example, real estate directly in your IRA or other types of alternative investments like precious metals, but they don't allow their IRA clients to invest their IRA funds into an LLC. So under that scenario, the IRA custodian holds the money. Under the IRA LLC scenario, the money's in an LLC bank account where you are the manager of the LLC and therefore have checkbook control. So for example, a common IRA custodian that is very familiar and has a streamlined IRA LLC process is Forge Trust. So we just did a webinar with Forge Trust yesterday on our My Community website, and you're free to join. Again, all are welcome. And you can watch the recording, you can look at the slides from that session. So next, you want to confirm that your IRA has enough money. So if you're short on funds, you can transfer other IRAs or money from a qualified plan, such as a former employer plan, and even make annual IRA contributions if you're eligible to do so in order to put more money into that IRA. But if you don't have those sources, like you don't have other retirement accounts to roll over, or you've already maximized your contributions, you're not going to be able to just simply put more money in. So that's why you want to make sure that you're budgeting accordingly based on your real estate investment, and that you have enough IRA funds to do what you want to do, and then invest those funds in the IRA-owned LLC. Now, on the don't side of the equation, you cannot lend personal money to your IRA LLC. That's a very clear prohibited transaction. It is prohibited to loan your personal funds to your own IRA or an LLC that's owned by your IRA. So that's where budgeting and planning is so important. Now let's turn to some additional do's and don'ts. So next, you want to make sure that you understand. So do understand the IRA LLC rules. The IRA rules also apply to the LLC that's funded with your IRA money. So for example, just like you cannot run a business through your IRA, you cannot use the LLC to run a business. In other words, you need to be passively investing in real estate. On the flip side of the equation, keeping in mind with those same IRA LLC rules, you cannot sell or exchange property that you own in your own name with property or that's in the LLC, or selling it to the LLC that's owned by your IRA. So it is prohibited to sell and or exchange property that you own directly or indirectly with the IRA LLC. So for example, like a 1031 exchange with property that you own in your own name. You can't do that with your IRA LLC. So it's important to work with a provider like us, who has experience in educating our customers in terms of what those rules are. And I would also, again, just to focus a little deeper on the indirect comment. So you also cannot indirectly sell property with your IRA LLC. So for example, you can't get creative and say, well, I'm going to sell it to my neighbor and then have my neighbor sell it to my IRA LLC. That's a step transaction. That step of adding your neighbor would just be ignored, and it would be analyzed as if you had directly sold it to your IRA LLC. So that's not going to be possible. Okay, so before we go to the next one, I would just remind you that if you do have questions that you brought or any that have come up as we've gone through these slides, please don't hesitate to send them over through the YouTube chat feature, and we'll address those questions. So next, you want to make sure that when you buy the property, you make the purchase offer in the name of the IRA LLC. So the IRA LLC is making the real estate purchase. It's not you personally. It's certainly not your business. It's not even the IRA. It's the LLC that's owned by your IRA. So write the offer in the name of the IRA LLC. So on the flip side, don't make the offer in your name. So again, the IRA LLC is purchasing the property, not you. So you want to make sure that all the documents, the legal documents to effectuate the purchase, are documented correctly using the right party names. In this case, the LLC that's owned by your IRA. So now let's turn to funding the IRA LLC. So in funding the purchase, so do fund the escrow account using IRA LLC funds. So just like the offer is made in the name of the IRA LLC, not your name, the earnest deposit needs to come from the IRA LLC funds. So on the flip side, don't fund the escrow with personal funds. Fund the escrow with IRA LLC funds. So don't first fund using personal funds and then have the IRA LLC reimburse you. That would be a prohibited transaction. So that's where proper planning really comes into play, because we sometimes see a scenario where someone is really excited about the ability to invest their IRA funds in real estate, along with checkbook control under this IRA LLC structure. And they may have a specific property that they think is, meets all their objectives and they're ready to buy it. Unfortunately, they don't have the money in the LLC account because they're just getting started with the process. So they may be tempted to go and put the offer in their name personally, use their personal funds. And you can't do that. You really need to do things properly, making the offer in the name of the IRA LLC, funding the earnest deposit with those IRA LLC funds. That's where it's helpful to get everything set up in advance so that you're ready when it's time to make that offer and you find a property that you want to invest in. So now at the closing, again, we notice the pattern. So do take title in the name of the IRA LLC at closing. So since the IRA LLC is investing in the property, the title is taken in the name of the IRA LLC, and the IRA LLC funds are wired directly to the title company. So don't take title in your name. Don't have the funds wired through your personal account. So again, the IRA LLC is the entity that's buying the property, so it needs to take the title. The funds would go directly from the LLC account over to the title company. So yes, so just to continue on with this point, do wire the IRA LLC funds to the title company. Have it go directly to the title company. Don't have the IRA LLC funds make a pit stop. So at closing, the IRA LLC funds cannot first flow to your personal account or your business account, as this could result in a taxable distribution. So even though if you might, for some reason, be having trouble getting the money over and you want to get it over to your personal account, that's not an option. So you really want to not be creative. You want to really be strict about following all of these steps to make sure that things are done properly. And thank you so much for the good question. So before we go, let's look at the next do and don't, and then we'll answer your good question. Thank you. So do pay expenses using IRA LLC funds and deposit the income to the IRA LLC going forward. So all the money related to this real estate investment that's owned by the LLC, that's owned by your IRA, needs to flow in and out of the bank account that was opened in the name of that LLC. So ongoing expenses, repairs, property taxes are paid from that LLC bank account using those IRA LLC funds. Proceeds of the investment, such as rental income or sale proceeds, are deposited back into that same IRA LLC bank account. So don't use the IRA LLC owned property or pay expenses with personal funds. So the rules do not allow for the use of personal or business funds to pay for property expenses. Moreover, once the property is owned by the LLC that's owned by your IRA, it is prohibited to use the IRA LLC owned property for personal or business use. If it's a rental property and it's not being rented out and you have out-of-town guests, you can't just have them stay at that property if it's in near where you live. You can't do it. So you also can't use it for business use. Like if it's not being used and you want to host a party for your clients there, again, you can't use it. Likewise, again, and this goes right to the good question, can funds be advanced for expenses to upkeep of property while in escrow prior to actual transfer of ownership? So that's a derivation of both this point we just went over, as well as the prior point about funding escrow. The funds need to come from the IRA LLC. It cannot come from your personal account. That's where timing and getting things set up in advance is so key, so you don't set yourself up for that type of situation. Hopefully that helps. Thank you so much for asking that great question, and let me know if you have any follow-up questions. So we do have plenty of time for more questions if anyone has more questions. If in the meantime, while you might be coming up with a question, I will note the URL of our community site where we will have posted a discussion thread for today's webinar. So in that thread, there'll be links to the slides, the full video. You're going to be able to ask questions in that thread, and we can continue the conversation there. Not seeing that there's any more questions. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to join and participate. We certainly appreciate that. Please, again, like this video. Please subscribe for more videos like this so you can have notifications of our weekly YouTube webinars. Thank you so much.